Hey, this is Bad Takes. I'm Laura McGann, the executive editor of Grid. I am here with my co-host, Matthew Yglesias.
Hello.
Hey, Matt. So, this week, like we do every week, we're going to get together, sit down, talk about a bad take.
So what's happening? What's up in takes?
I mean, this is going to be, I think, kind of contentious. Usually, it's pretty clean.
Often we're like-minded.
Often we are like-minded about when takes are bad, and we disagree on maybe why. But this week, we've got something controversial in terms of you and me. We've got a take that maybe one of us thinks is bad.
Intense disputes.
Intense disputes. Okay, so the topic this week.
The Queen.
The Queen.
Of England.
Of England.
And Trinidad, Australia.
And other things.
Many
but really,
dominions.
See, you're already trying to hijack the take. And that's not the point of this conversation. So, okay, I will focus on the bad take. The bad take this week. And there are different bad takes I could have brought, but I'm bringing Tucker Carlson. He sends out a tweet soon after the Queen's passing, and he writes, Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain. And then he's got a video. It's a clip from his show where he's got this kind of montage, or he's got this little sort of spiel where he frames the history of imperial Britain in a very positive light. And he is lamenting the loss of the Queen as a sort of symbol of that time period. And overall, he's making the case that we should mourn the Queen.
Well, so he says, one part that just kind of got me off, but he's taking the Queen as a symbol of all of Britain, and he's trying to trigger the libs. And he says the English, quote, took their colonial responsibility seriously. He says that they ruled with, quote, decency unmatched by any empire in human history. And then he really leans into it, probably going maybe further than I would. And he says, after 75 years of independence, has India produced a single building as beautiful as the Bombay Trade Station the British colonialists built? No, sadly, it is not one. So that, I agree, the architecture take, a little bit weak.
That's a little extreme.
But basically he's saying...
So what's the root of this? So I think I'm going to just take a broad brush stroke here and say this is a bad take, but you're going to actually, what is the kernel of something here that you actually want to unpack?
I want to try to understand.
Yeah, try to help us understand here.
Well, I want to understand where you're coming from.
Okay.
You're Irish.
Sure. I am Irish. Yes. I am Irish. Yes. And true Irish. So my mother's side, they were famine Irish, came to the U.S. through Canada. And my father came here in the 60s on Aer Lingus. So it's both sides. And I've spent time in Ireland. Most of my dad's family is there. Actually, all my dad's family is there. So I have personal ties to this story. But, more broadly as well. I just... care about it and think it's interesting.
But so I just want to...
Here's my take. So I think when I saw these types of take, which, Tucker Carlson, of course, is an extreme version. Whenever you cite Tucker, it's an extreme version of whatever. But in this case, what I object to is, one, the idea that colonial Britain was somehow superior to any other type of imperialist endeavor where people were, killed and enslaved and their countries were plundered. And I would just say, I just don't see how on its face you can straight face say that the British Empire didn't, inflict incredible harm over hundreds of years. Two, there's been this idea of linking the Queen to sort of Britain as a whole, that the reason there's outpouring of support is that she's a symbol, that she is a connection to something broader than herself.
Well, this is part of my question here, because obviously Queen Elizabeth did not conquer India in the 18th century.
True.
She neither built a nice train station in Bombay, nor did she perpetrate the slave trade hundreds of years ago. And, I get it on some level, right? The point of a constitutional monarchy is that the monarch serves as a symbol for the nation. And a lot of the sort of, the praise, the mourning, right, is clearly about that. It's not like Elizabeth, like did something really nice to me and now I'm sad. It's people are expressing their feelings about Britain. And so it's fair on one level to also attach negative sentiments to her that are not really about her, that are just about like the history of the United Kingdom over hundreds of years' time, because you sort of, you take the good with the bad if you assume a symbolic role. But I'm wondering, I mean, do you have so like Tucker's whole thing, right? He's trying to fight with people about 18th and 19th century imperialism.
Right.
He's not really having an argument about Elizabeth at all. But some people, I was noting for the sake of annoying you that the Prime Minister of Ireland, put out a very...
You can't even say it.
the Taoiseach of Ireland, when the Queen died, he put out a statement, expressing his sympathies and condolences and thanking her for her role in helping to normalize relations between Ireland and the United Kingdom, citing her historic visit in 2011.
Yeah, about 70 years into her reign, she said, I'm going to weigh in here. So this is the difference. So yes, I agree that the death of a major political and social figure can be interpreted through the lens of the country itself and, good or bad. Yes, obviously. I don't think people are wrong for thinking that way or feeling that way. But I just think, for me, we are letting her off the hook. That somehow she is allowed to be interpreted as a statue or some kind of Rorschach test, when really she was a living, breathing political figure who had a lot of power and a lot of money in key moments since she took over since 1952. And I think two things. That one, she was considered apolitical. And I don't believe that a person with money and power can be apolitical, that by choosing to do nothing, that is a political position. And throughout her reign, she sat on the sidelines and she did not use what she had to make the lives of the people who made her very wealthy any better. We can unpack that.
But I mean, is that just a generic?
No, two. My second point with this is that you can also very directly, and I have something I want to talk about on this, is I think as a journalist, there is value in the truth and facing history. And when you look at Queen Elizabeth and the fact that she never issued an apology about slavery to any country, the fact that her son never issued an apology of any kind, and then her grandson and his wife traveled to the Caribbean this year and were shocked when they discovered that some people were very upset about the history of the monarchy and were sort of surprised that there were people who objected to them riding in an open Land Rover in this imperialistic parade. And they were confused by this and surprised. And so what that said to me is that the Queen has never, she both broadly as a political figure did not do anything to ensure that the truth about the monarchy was instilled amongst people in the UK. And you look at her own son and her own grandson, and they don't seem to get it either. So what responsibility did she ever take as a monarch?
Well, so, I mean, I get that there is in the, Afro-Caribbean Commonwealth countries a sort of a rising tide of Republican sentiment. And I think, I've read in the papers that a lot of countries like Jamaica, Bahamas, that have sort of stayed in the... It's not that they might leave the Commonwealth. There's like two layers of Commonwealth
Barbados,
membership. And they might become republics because that has become part of, I think shared cultural understandings of history shift over time, right? And, we have moved to an understanding of history, and certainly they have in the Caribbean, that, the monarchy is deeply implicated in slavery and imperialism, and that imperialism was bad.
So you think that's changed? Do you think that the people of the Caribbean used to think it was good?
I mean, I think some of them. I mean, there's a reason.
Or is there a difference between what people thought and felt and believed and what they feel that they have power to say?
No, I mean, I think that there is. That, India and Pakistan...
Like, nothing changed.
I know that nothing changed. I mean, this is exactly what I'm saying. In the late 1940s, India and Pakistan left the monarchy right away and became republics because they had a clear shared social understanding in South Asia that, like, the British Empire was bad and that they had wanted nothing to do with it, that it was an external imposition on them. They were washing their hands on it. That was something that Nehru and Gandhi agreed on, and it was gone. The Anglo-Caribbean have had the opportunity to leave the monarchy since the 50s. And they have been not exercising that. And it's been debated in Jamaica, and the Republicans have not historically won the argument. And I think they may win it now, which is fine. I mean, it's not like my place to say what is and isn't the correct historical interpretation of Jamaican history, right? Like, everyone is going to agree now, like you, me, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, King Charles III. No one's going to say, like, slavery was good, right? It was clearly bad. And, if they want to shift
you're not addressing the question, which is the Queen has never taken responsibility for slavery. Her son has not. And her grandson just this year did not apologize when called upon to apologize. So
and
this is not one day. This is not 1952 in a day.
Right.
This was over decades and decades when I think the global shared understanding of slavery is that it was bad. And she had access to information that showed that her wealth, she's worth, we don't know for sure because she doesn't have to disclose fully what she's worth or her art or anything. We have no idea really, but we know that it's in the billions. And she knows where that money came from. She knew how she acquired that art. And she chose to not take responsibility for that. And the fact that the politics in various Afro-Caribbean countries were weighing whether or not it was to their advantage to stay in the Commonwealth with the Queen as their head of state or whether to become a republic, to me, is not relevant to her taking responsibility as a powerful person and facing history as she should. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter to me whether or not I think you take responsibility for your actions as a person, as a powerful person, as an institution. And when you're the head of a powerful institution with a legacy, you should take responsibility for it. And you don't get to just say, oh, yeah, these people were fine with that slavery. They're not saying.
Well, no.
So why should she? So but I think what you're saying, unless I'm wrong, is like they were fine with it until recently. So therefore.
No.
Like she doesn't owe. What are you saying?
I'm trying to give a fair-minded presentation of these things. I'm trying to acknowledge that there is a political change that has gone against the monarchs and that is fine, that I am not going to wade in like guns blazing, the Queen is amazing, everybody needs to love her, et cetera, just to say that these understandings can go in different directions. And that, I was looking into the Irish situation. I've been to Ireland. I know a little bit about it. I know that you were Irish. And it was interesting to me that the dominant political understanding there has been shifting in the other direction, right? That I was looking at the Irish Independent's live coverage of the Queen's funeral, which is like, it's on the top of their website, right? They are like buying in on people are interested in the Queen. They are not doing biting political commentary about her. They are, in fact, co-producing their funeral coverage with the Belfast Telegram. Right.
Well,
so
sure,
they are talking, as the Prime Minister did, about the Queen's role in helping to facilitate reconciliation there on the island, right? And so, that to me is just, as somebody who is like not Jamaican or English or Irish and has nothing in particular to do with any of this, it's interesting to me how the symbolism of monarchy can work and can help do constructive
Right.
work,
That's
and that
the
and that
point.
it has in certain areas.
So here's
right?
the point, right? That she's also aware that it can work. That the reference that comes up in sort of the statements and things that you're referring to from political figures coming out of Ireland is that her stock rose incredibly when she came to Ireland in 2011. She didn't apologize for the colonial era, but she went to some key places and she laid a wreath at a memorial for soldiers who died fighting for Irish independence. She went to Croke Park, which is a place that was very meaningful in the Irish independence movement. So an incident that happened there. And
she promoted symbolic
she promoted, and she knew that it was important, that she saw it as she had an opportunity to help normalize relations between these two countries. And she knew the significance of it. But what would have been good is if she had done that more than once in 2011 in Ireland. So because she knew, this is also about my point with personal responsibility, is that it's not that she didn't know she had power. She decided through the vast majority of her tenure to not use it.
But that's where I disagree, right? That, this is a largely symbolic constitutional monarchy. And what she did in Ireland that seems to have been appreciated by most Irish leaders and Irish people was following on policy change, right? The relationship between the UK and the Republic of Ireland has evolved a lot over the past 100 years, right? And it's evolved particularly since 1997, since the Good Friday Agreement. And now, 2011 happened in a very sort of happy time, right? Post-Good Friday, but pre-Brexit, right? When it seemed like things were really working out well in terms of reconciliation there, that the border was greatly softened, et cetera. And so the Queen's visit, right, it followed on these kind of policy shifts. The reason I think it's challenging, and neither she nor Charles has been able to successfully navigate the slavery issue with the colonies in the Western Hemisphere, is that there's no policy reconciliation that they can follow up on, right? It's the exact same in the United States, right? Nothing will get people fighting on Twitter more than arguments about these historical legacy issues. And it's because the present day policy challenge, is uncertain, undecided, right? What is the relationship between the United Kingdom as a country and Jamaica as a country, right? And at a period when there was positive feeling about that or not, or a sense that the trade relationship was important or something, it worked out well. Now it doesn't, but this is not really something what could Charles do, right?
So there's a couple things.
Because I think that which is reasonable. I'm an American. I live in a republic. I think republics are great. If you just fundamentally object to the idea of a monarchy, which inherently just involves some rich people in castles kind of chilling without doing any real work. That's fine.
I'm not zooming out to talk about all monarchies. I am here to talk about Queen Elizabeth and why I don't think fawning coverage is fair. And I think that you need to look at somebody and look at their full legacy. And, you're asking, well, what could Charles do? Oh, geez, what could these people with all this money sitting around possibly have done over all of these years? Well, I don't know. Maybe they could have set up some kind of foundation along the way that could have set up some schools in any of these places. You were talking about leaving behind infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And in India, for example, you were talking about that, of leaving behind schools and buildings, et cetera.
Well, to be clear, I was quoting Tucker Carlson.
But weren't we talking about this? We also talked about this at another point.
I do want to talk about that.
We should talk about that. But and not quoting Tucker Carlson. But the issue is, if you look at the departure of the British from these places, it wasn't, okay, that's great. They left and everything was equal and fine. But, you look at the caste system in India, and certainly there were roots of that in the country that predated the British Empire, which is somewhat of touchy question and subject. But certainly the British were very happy to formalize that, include it in their census, make it a key part of their control over the country. And so then they just left with, we talk about, they left behind infrastructure. It's like, well, yes, they left behind a caste system that left a lot of people behind. And the queen, she could have set up, using her vast wealth, schools for children in India if she had wanted to. She could have done the same in any number of the colonies that had an underclass of children who weren't able to access public education. She could have done it in Ireland. She chose not to. And frankly, if you look at her in general, she's never set up a foundation to do anything. She's a patron. She does patronage. And patronage is not the same as giving money. She attaches her name to things, and that's it. And other people raise money around it. She has never, as far as we know, given any money of her own to any cause, ever. Not a penny. She keeps it to herself. She has a private collection of art that was bought with, I'm sorry, but slave, money made from slavery. She keeps it hoarded away. We don't know what's there. And what I'm saying is that any of these steps of saying, you know what, maybe I need to return some of this art, which has been this is an issue that's been going on for decades and really gaining steam really in the last, I'd say, even 5 years of returning objects and art to its rightful home. And not only has she not done that, but in, I believe it was 2017, fought laws that would require her to disclose what she had, that she is still clinging personally to the gains of colonialism while trotting around the globe waving and smiling and saying, presenting the monarchy as this, a symbol of British politeness and kindness. But she herself is still profiting off of this history. And that is personal to her. That is her decision. And she made it. And she never did anything about it. And I have a problem with that.
All right. Let's take a break, and then I want to come back and dodge these questions.
Okay. Welcome back. We took a little break, took a little breather. Matt, I want you to lay out for me.
All right,
What do you think? Because I think I really have been dominating the conversation here, but I am going to good faith pause and let you lay out what you're thinking.
So I got to admit, I did not actually come in here prepared to talk in great detail about Elizabeth or Charles as human individuals who make decisions. I thought we were going to talk sort of as Tucker was talking about Britain, right? About the history of Britain and these, the queen who has passed is simply a symbol of the nation. So we're like uncorking takes. And,
we can talk about this too.
And so a lot of people, the reason Tucker did his segment is that a lot of people uncorked their like very harsh, like Britain is horrible kind of takes about this. I did a little of that because I'm obsessed with their terrible housing policy. But, in terms of imperialism, like it's a tough one because I don't want to be the guy who's like, no, yes, it is great to roam around the world conquering other countries because it is not great. I do not approve of that. And if you are a world leader somewhere, Vladimir Putin, who's considering trying to conquer a foreign country, I would advise you do not do it. Pump the brakes, don't do it. That being said, here we're in the
all right, I'm being good faith. Go ahead.
Okay, because there is a big sort of larger discourse happening in the world that is about like capitalism and why some countries are prosperous and other countries are poorer that tends to place tons and tons and tons of explanatory weight on the imperialism of the 18th and 19th centuries, and then in particular looks at the colonial empires that were largest. And Britain clearly had the largest colonial empire and says, aha, that's the worst, right? And I do think that it's important.
So pause there. You think because it had the most, something like 20% of the globe, the size made it the worst.
Right.
That's what you were now going to address? Is that this question of were they the worst because they were they're the best at it?
Well, and also to historicize this whole phenomenon, right? So, like, when Britain conquered India, like, I'm not going to go, like, full Tucker and, like, dissing post-independence India and stuff like that. Like, I think that's nonsense. But what's true is it is important to remember that, like, what was conquered there was not a happy self-governing democracy, right? Not because of anything wrong with the people of India, but because no place was a happy self-governing democracy, right? The British Empire did not invent the idea that people should be ruled by distant, unaccountable rulers who were exploited. Everybody was ruled that way. Right. What Britain and the United States and a few other places contributed to the world eventually was the idea of parliaments and elections.
I do want to pause. I know I'm not supposed to interrupt you, but not all countries were ruled that way, right? Britain, for example, there were colonizers, right, that were not. You just said that everybody was ruled that way.
Right, but I'm saying that even when imperialism began, right? These were not themselves democratic societies, right?
Okay.
And I think that you have to contextualize the things that were occurring. I mean, I was unrelated to the Queen. Before she passed away, I'd started reading Mark Koyama's book, How the World Became Rich, The Historical Origins of Economic Growth. And he just runs through, there's tons and tons of stuff in the book, and it is not mostly about this. But one thing that he looks at is there's a scholarship on the impact of colonialism on the countries that were colonized. And the impact is generally negative. As you would expect, I think. But, the scholarship on this shows, at least some of the studies that he cites, that, for example, the British colonies in Africa did better than the French colonies in Africa. And that the reason for that is that Britain was more open to missionaries coming, and the missionaries started schools. And so you had higher initial literacy rates in British colonies than in French colonies. And, not that the British weren't there to help out. They were doing their thing, trying to get money, whatever it was. But the fact is that if the British Army showed up in your town, that is better than if the French Army had shown up in your town. And importantly, if the British Army didn't show up, somebody else was showing up, right? Nobody made it through that episode of history without something happening. He's also got a study that Bruce Sacerdote did, and they're looking at islands that were colonized for different places. And Spanish and Portuguese islands, the longer they were under colonial government, the worse that they do. But British and French ones, the longer they were under colonial government, the better they're doing. That they, set up roads and administrative structures and other things like that, which again is not to say that decolonization was a mistake or that empire was good necessarily, but that the process of modernization as a historical episode that all different parts of the world went through over time, or didn't, frankly, in some places, was complicated and difficult and painful, and crimes were committed and things like that. But there's no reason to think that I can see that the British were unusually bad, and some reason to think that they were actually unusually good compared to sort of other ruling elements at that time, and that it's reasonable, I think, for British people to, want to hold their heads up to some extent about that, just as we in America, I don't even know what to say. I once tried to say something on a podcast about the total dispossession of Native Americans from their land, and it came across to people as too flip, and I apologize for that. But it's the historical crime that's at the foundation of the United States of America is so monumental as to be hard to even put into words in a way that doesn't sound excessively flip. Right. And yet, if Joe Biden wants to stand up in front of a bunch of flags and say America's an idea, we don't all go yell at him. We know what he means. We know the spirit that's intended, and that, there's patriotic people here and a lot of great things that have happened in American history. And I feel Britain is entitled, if anything, more so to that kind of defense of its historical legacy in a world which, frankly, there's just a lot of brutality in the history of the world. And, it's important to acknowledge that and to face up to it, but also to contextualize it and historicize it and not just kind of, randomly slog on one country because their symbolic monarch happens to have died this month. That's where I am.
Okay.
A strong defense.
Okay.
Of the UK.
Okay.
It's an okay country. It's pretty good.
So
they invented the steam engine.
The difference between the Queen and Joe Biden
and the steam engine.
Weird connection there with trains and Joe Biden. But
where would Joe Biden be without British people and their steam engines?
I mean, I don't know. I just got dizzy. Okay.
Still in Delaware.
He'd be in Delaware. So the problem I have with this take is, one, calling someone less bad than others doesn't, to me, merit taking pride in that history. And that seems to be the position of the British in this context, that given the historical context, we weren't so bad. The problem is they were really, really bad. Like, millions of people died or were enslaved or starved at various points or had their land stolen or, their jewels are still sitting in the monarch's crown. And so that's, I suppose, nice that they were less bad.
Well, but who's allowed to have national pride in this world?
Well, you can have national pride in the UK and also say, we are sorry for these parts of our history, and we can face them, and we can, the way that I think the United States is just starting to grapple in some ways with slavery, of saying, hey, maybe we don't want this Confederate monument here because we don't like what it represents. We're going to take that down. Mm-hmm. That's not who we're going to celebrate in our history. And the monarchy has never really faced the fact that they have the life they have because they took advantage of people.
So the Confederates...
So I think that you could say that I would have more respect, and I think a lot of people would, to both contend with what happened and to say, the parts of our history we do stand by. You can look to any positive points of British history and say, that's what we're going to do going forward. We have apologized. We are going to try to make amends. We are going to try to return our stolen objects. We are going to try to invest in ways to improve the lives of those we've harmed, and we're going to move forward. But that's not what they've done. They've attempted to hide the things that they stole and at the same time say we're good. And that's what I have a problem with. The other issue that you raised, and now I forget what I...
Well, here, wait. Okay. I want to address Confederates, though, because you brought this up.
Yeah.
Because I think that this is... I mean, the commemoration of Confederates in the United States, I think, is A, insane, and B, it's kind of like easy mode historical recompense because, when something happens like Jefferson Davis Highway over across the bridge in Virginia gets finally renamed Richmond Highway, you can be like, well, why are we doing this, right? Why are we renaming this? And it's A, Jefferson Davis was like a bad guy, right?
Sure.
He owned slaves. B, Jefferson Davis actually was the political leader of an organized rebellion against the United States of America.
Sure.
Right. So you ask yourselves in our history, it's like, why were we ever commemorating this guy? Right. And Robert E. Lee and these other Confederates, Fort Bragg and stuff like that. And, if you understand the history of late 19th century America, you can tell the story of why they came to be commemorated. But fundamentally, you were celebrating not only racists and slavers, but rebels. Right. What's hard, the hard questions of American historical remembrance, there's still Confederate monuments up, but they're coming down. They should all come down. I feel really clear on that. And I think that the tide of history is in that direction. I went to George Washington's, they call it George Washington's Mount Vernon, in part because they're not even sure what word you should use to characterize what we used to call a plantation, which is a kind of prettied up way of saying that this was like a forced labor camp where people extracted natural resources for profit. And everything around Washington, I think is quite complicated because you look at it, you say, well, I don't think that owning slaves and enslaving people and exploiting their labor for personal gain is good. But also, he's not commemorated he's commemorated for being the first president, for being the leader of the American Revolution, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a much more fraught situation to say, right, are we going to tear down the people who were the founding figures of the country, the people who made sort of contributions that we think are important to the development of the idea of a constitutional republic and equality under the law, et cetera, over time. And I think as Americans, like, we have not made a lot of progress toward processing that, in part because it's just like really unclear what the right answer is. And I think that the British are in a similar kind of state, right? Because you want to say, like, what is the positive historical legacy of Britain as a country over the years? And, I was quipping about steam engines, but like it's the Industrial Revolution was brought in Britain to a large extent. And so much that followed from that about steam power and railroads and ships and exploration, that's like the foundation of all modern prosperity, right? Whether you're in the United States or India, China, Japan, Ireland, we are all enjoying high standard of living because of a set of processes and changes that Britain put into action. And it's also their own version of parliamentary government, right, which is an important legacy around the world that they are, using in India and Jamaica and all these places, and that has spread very far and wide. And those things co-developed with imperialism and slavery in a very deep way. The British weren't the first people who thought of the idea of trying to conquer some other people and exploit their natural resources. People have been doing that for thousands of years. They were better at it than anybody else, precisely because they invented all this technology that's the foundation of modern society. So it's hard to look at people there and kind of, be, okay, here's our Jefferson Davis, here's our Frederick Douglass, the good and the bad. It's a lot of George Washington type people, who made these big strides for humanity, but also did it in a time when, there was just incredible levels of exploitation of the weakness of the rest of the world compared to it.
So what you're talking about here with the Industrial Revolution is the notion that what came out of the Industrial Revolution was this shared prosperity, that it ignited economic growth across the globe to the benefit of many, many people. The point of the monarchy is to take from other people for the benefit of a few. And that's what they represent. And that is a different thing.
Yeah, see, there I just think, so you're a Republican at heart.
Yeah, I guess.
Which is good, I guess.
Well, you can also, like you were saying, of less bad and alternatives and these other things, you could have other symbols of things. You could have a monument to a train.
Yes,
you don't need to have somebody who literally is rich because she stole some stuff. Her crown has stolen jewels in it. She wears it around like it's okay.
I get you. I just what if
I showed up here like wearing I don't know, your hat, and I'm like, no, it's mine. You'd be like, what the hell, man? Give me my hat back.
But this is where I come back. But this is where I come back to
crazy talk. I just think I feel like I am a sane person.
Okay, but your house and my house and everybody's house in this country is just built on some land that was stolen from some people, and you're not giving it back.
Well, I'm not really in a powerful position to do that.
But I mean, this is I'm
not saying every Joe walking down the street in London, needs to atone for the past. What I'm saying is that institutions need to reckon with the past. And when you are the leader of an institution, you have an obligation to do it.
Okay, so here is maybe a point of potential synthesis here, which is that I think I keep wanting to elevate to just talk about Britain, right, rather than to talk about Charles III. That being said, I think that there is this very complicated historical legacy that is hard to parse, et cetera, et cetera. And I do think, listening to you, that one potential good thing that a monarchy could do, that like can't be done in America because we don't have a king, is that because there is this royal family that has like personal property, which is large in scale, even though it's small compared to the global economy, is that he could actually do things to concretize the notion of apology and reconciliation,
yes,
and should do that. I mean, I think particularly with regard to art and, some other things like that, right? I mean, there are probably some real estate properties
yes.
in the UK that could be liquidated, and then the funds could be used to build, some facilities in various former colonies, things like that. And that if he took that path, that could end up being something that we look back on to say, well, this is actually part of the upside of sort of like having a symbolic monarch, is that you are able to do things that have a material element, but that are really about the symbolism of it, right? Whereas, in the United States, like you're saying, like, well, I'm not rich and powerful, but it's like that's the
problem. It's
the problem for Native Americans, right, is like they've been suffered complete dispossession, but then you come to any individual middle-class American who benefits from that, and it's like, well, it's not my problem, right? And so, what are you going to do? Whereas Elizabeth didn't, but Charles could try to do something.
Right. I mean, I think that a monarchy is unique in that way, that they have amassed, wealth and stature and a certain type of life from many, many people. And that's different than other situations. And so, yeah, they could. If you are a symbol, you could actually do a lot of good by doing symbolically good things.
All right. So I guess to wrap this up, I feel like there are some valid points lurking in Tucker's trolling. I don't find it to be a total.
I'm gonna throw my laptop against the wall.
I don't find it to be a totally terrible take. But you have convinced me that the Queen kind of messed this up, and that her son should try to do better.
That'd be a good idea. Okay. All right. I think we can leave it there.
All right. Fair enough. So Bad Takes is a production of Grid. Our producer is Olivia Reingold. Many, many, many thanks to her. Thanks to all of you who are listening. This is still a new show, so if you recommend it to your friends, if you rate us highly on Apple and other places, we will really appreciate that. And we'll be back soon with more Bad Takes.